So those of you that have taken some or attended some of my other webinars know that I really focus a lot on that who, what, and why of branding. And we'll kind of talk about that and sort of how that relates to data in this session today. So first, I'd like to start out with a poll just to see everybody who's here. In your organizations, are you currently using data to inform your branding? So one for yes, sort of, maybe, not sure, and a no, let's get started. And that's why you're here today, I assume. So I will give you a couple of minutes as the votes are coming in. And then we'll also kind of see what other organizations think about this topic as well. For those of you that have attended some of my other sessions, you know that I really love to include a lot of data points. Again, I really feel like being data informed is super important to creating branding and marketing that is really strategic and shares your mission. So I really just always love to share some polls and then share those data points. All right, and I think we've got almost everybody that has participated. I'll give you guys a couple more seconds. Okay, great. So it looks like we have about, well, the majority is in that sort of. So we have, oops, we can share the results. So we've got 11% with yes, using the data to inform branding, which is great. And then we've got the majority of the attendees, 78% is in that kind of sort of, not really sure if we're using our data for enhancing our branding. And then about 11% is not. So that's great. So you're in the perfect place to really get started. So now, like I mentioned, let's look at some of the stats as far as in the industry. So the first stat is kind of an overall stat from the Chartered Institute of Marketing that says 48% of marketers are measuring metrics relating to branding. So these are kind of marketers overall, not just nonprofit. So that's about half, which is surprising because, I would think that it would be higher in just marketing as general. And then the stat below, which is from Every Action and Nonprofit Hub, says that about 46% of nonprofits are not consistently using data to make decisions. So that's about half of nonprofits and a little more than half just of marketers in general that are not measuring those metrics that can help you to enhance and improve your branding. So we definitely want to start talking about why it's important. And it will also help you to stand out because you can see that half of the other organizations are not doing this. So you really can do this to give yourself an advantage. So the first step, we're going to talk about why data is important in branding. So first of all, it gives you a clarity on your audience. So a lot of the data that you'll be collecting through your organization that you're probably already collecting is really relating to your audience. So those are the things that you collect in your CRM and your donor software like Keela, giving you sort of that insight into who your audience is, who your donors are. You also may be looking at, your social media stats as far as who's interacting with you on social media. And those are all really important because that's part of that who in branding that we talk about, that we really want to make sure that we are speaking to the audience that we intend to. So that's the first part of it. Then the second part is that it helps knowing that data, having insight to the data helps to make stronger connections. So that's part of that why in the who, what, and why of branding. And that's the part that I really talk about a lot in my sessions, because that's really where people connect with you when your mission, your message really resonates with them. That's how the connections develop. And data can help you because you can take a look and see, okay, are people engaging with us? Are there certain types of posts or messaging that's resonating with them? And are they connecting? Is that converting? This is where data really comes into play. And then lastly, it helps you determine the most effective channels. So, I know I work with a lot of nonprofits, and I know that capacity can really be a challenge sometimes. And maybe you can't be on every social network, nor should you be, right? So by looking at your data, you can see, okay, we know that we're interacting with our donors on these channels, or maybe we're seeing a gap that we could be interacting them with this other channel, that we see that could be successful for us. So it really kind of helps you to determine where you should be putting out your messaging, and then also what is effective on those channels. So it really helps you, like we said, get that clarity, make sure that your organization is in the right place, and ultimately making those connections. So now we'll talk a little bit about how data insight plays into the donor acquisition process. So the way that I've laid it out here is the first step being trust. So of course, someone needs to get to know your organization, trust you. The next step is that connection that they make, where they feel like they kind of get to know you, your message resonates with them. And then the last step is the engagement. So that's where they really start to become part of the organization, and then ultimately become a donor, a volunteer, a supporter, in some way becoming involved with your organization. So now we'll look at those three parts and how data plays into each of those. So the first one is the trust. So I'm sure everybody's heard people buy from people that they know, like, and trust. And it's the same thing in the nonprofit world. People really do want to get to know you and trust you before they either, make an investment financially, or before they maybe share, something about your organization. They want to make sure that they really get to know you. And trust is also the first step in making a genuine connection with someone. So one of the data points we can look at here is, what does your audience say about your organization? So the next part is connection. So we know that people connect with organizations that they trust, as we talked about, and ones that have a mission that resonates with them and has something that they can connect with and they relate to. And we also know that connection leads to engagement. So one of the questions you can ask yourself regarding data here is your audience connecting with you, and how are they connecting with you effectively? And then the last part of the process is the engagement. So engagement, as we know, leads to long-term relationships, and relationships leads to support. So that's where you start to develop those repeat donors, the volunteers that you can count on, the fans, the brand ambassadors that are, sharing the word about your organization. So the data points that you can look at in this area is your audience engaging with you? Are they really making that connection? Are they commenting? Are they excited about what you're doing? Are they sharing it with their network? Are they doing those peer-to-peer fundraisers? So now we'll start to talk about how you can assess your brand. So how you can start to look at the different ways that data will play into how the effectiveness of your brand. So first, we'll start off with determining the type of data that is important to collect. So we'll do that through a brand assessment. And I know that in my other webinars, I've talked about doing a brand audit. And now we'll talk about a couple of other ways that you can assess your brand that go into maybe a little bit more depth, and give you more opportunity to look at places that you can start looking at data that you can collect and making specific goals relating to your branding. So the first brand assessment I want to share with you is adapted from the BQ test. So this is from a book that's called What's Your BQ by Sandra Cellini. And by BQ, she means the brand quotient. So I've sort of adapted her BQ test into this assessment that you can use for your nonprofit brand. So the 4 areas that you're looking at are brand strategy, brand alignment, brand communication, and brand execution. And now we'll look at each of those in a little bit more depth. So brand strategy is really that who, that why, like I talk about in my uh, webinars, my previous branding webinars, is really looking at, does your brand have a strong point of difference? Is there something about your organization that is really different maybe from other, similarly minded organizations? Do you have a really unique story? A lot of times there's like that founder's story that comes into play, or some other story that relates to how the organization started. And do you have a strong why? And that's something that, like I said, if you've attended my other sessions, you know that we talk a lot about the why. So this is where you're starting to think about some of these parts of your strategy. And with the assessment, you want to score them. This can be sort of casual. In the book, which I'll give you the link at the end of the webinar, but in the book, it's a little more of a formal scoring system. But in my opinion, you can go through and you can just check off, are these things a yes or are they a no, to kind of see where your brand stands. So the next one is brand alignment. So this is where you look at if your brand is aligned with your organization's mission and vision. And sometimes, this can sort of stray as the years go by. So it's always good to look at these things, maybe, on a yearly basis if you can, if not, maybe every couple of years. You also want to make sure your brand is aligned with your overall organizational goals. And these obviously do change maybe every 1 to 3 years. So you do want to look at these at least yearly. And then you also want to ask yourself, are you using audience feedback to improve your brand expression? So are you maybe taking the comments that donors or supporters are giving to you? If you're doing surveys, are you incorporating that data into your brand, making improvements? So again, you can look at these questions, check them off to kind of give yourself sort of an informal score. And then next is brand communication. So this is the part that I love, since my history of my career really started as a visual artist. So this is the part that I love, is, looking at, does your marketing and communication accurately express your brand? So this is looking at all of your materials, print through digital, website, to those annual appeals that you're working on right now. Is that expressing your brand accurately in both visuals and messaging? Is your branding consistent? Do you have, and most importantly, use a brand guide? And those of you that have attended my sessions know we've talked about that in the past, and I'm very, very passionate about brand guides. And have you conducted a brand audit in the last 6 months? So that's really looking at all of these marketing and communications outlets and assessing them for consistency. And again, you can kind of keep it casual and just sort of a yes or no to score yourself. And then lastly, we're looking at brand execution. So is your brand essence reflected in your daily operations and outreach? So this can include things like, answering the phone, answering emails, replying to messages online, maybe your programming. I know now a lot of programming is virtual, but if you're starting to do the in-person programming and the environments, and everything really can be assessed for brand consistency. And you can also ask yourself, is your brand promise delivered consistently throughout all of that outreach? And lastly, are people talking about or referring to your organization accurately? So that's a really good one to think about. And you'll see that we're going to talk about that a lot more as we talk about the different ways to collect data. So now when you're done with that, you can see how many yeses did you get? Was it 80%? Was it 50%? And that can kind of help you see, okay, where do we really want to start creating some branding goals and tracking those branding goals? And we'll get to that a little bit further in the session, but I think this is a really great assessment. And like I said, I've adapted it into sort of a simpler version. But if you were interested, I will give you the link to the book where you can kind of do the full test and get your score at the end. So the second brand assessment I want to share with you is called the Brand Commitment Scale. And this was developed by Marty Neumeier, who is a branding speaker and expert. He's written many books. His books are wonderful. I've studied with him as well in his master classes. And his books are very, very user friendly. And it kind of makes it simple to understand. But they are a little bit geared towards maybe business to business. So I like to take his resources and adapt them so that the nonprofits can use them as well. So in this case, you'll see he looks at a way to assess your brand as a ladder. So it's how committed people are to your brand. So starting with first, their confidence in your brand. Are they feeling satisfied with what you're doing? Then moving up into developing that trust. So are you delighting them? Those of you that are marketers may have heard of that, delighting the customer and marketing, and which is, creating that trust. And then moving up, are you creating a sense of belonging for them? Are they feeling like, oh, I'm really part of this amazing community, which is creating that engagement? And then lastly, the last step is the empowerment. So are they actually fulfilling their promise to you? So are they giving that donation? Are they becoming a volunteer? Are they sharing your posts on Facebook? Becoming that fan for your organization. And I really, really like this scale because it really looks at, it's, kind of similar to people talk about the funnel and moving customers through the funnel. And I think this is kind of a nicer way of going up the ladder of how connected people are. And you can kind of look at your audience, at the different segments of your audience, and say, okay, well, this segment is maybe in this stage. We want to kind of keep them moving. What can we do? What data can we start to measure to start moving them up? So I thought this was a really nice scale to look at. So here you can see I've added in some phrases that would relate to a nonprofit. So in that first stage, that satisfaction, a potential donor might say, yeah, I believe in this organization. I trust them. I really feel strongly about their mission. And then in the second rung, they're going to say, okay, yeah, I really see the impact of this organization, and I would totally share them or recommend them to somebody in my network. And then in the next rung, they're saying, oh my gosh, I feel so connected to this organization. Like when I get their emails, I get excited and I support their work. I donate, I volunteer. And then in the last one, they're like, oh, this organization is part of my life. Like I can't even imagine them not being around and me not being able to be a part of it. So that's really where we want people to be ultimately. But it's nice to kind of visually look at, where is your audience going? And this is really being driven by your brand. This is being driven by that who, what, and why that you have determined in your brand. So this scale does help you to determine the effectiveness. Are you moving people through the ladder up to that ultimate empowerment where they really can't imagine life without your organization? And as you can see in the bottom, I've noted the resources. This book that this is from, it's called The Brand Flip, and I have a link to that in the resources page. So how you would score yourself basically in this brand assessment would be, how is your audience moving up the ladder? Where are they in the ladder? Are they sort of getting stuck somewhere? Are you bringing them up to that empowerment? What percentage is in that empowerment and what percentage is still kind of in that satisfaction of kind of still feeling it out? So this is definitely where you can start looking at your data, looking at your surveys. And Marty Neumeier has a great survey that relates to this brand ladder, which I'm happy to share as well. Or, like I said, you can probably get a copy of the book at your local library. So now we'll start to talk about ways to collect brand related data. So a lot of these are familiar to you, and I'm going to kind of move from those simple kind of everyday tasks that you're doing into some more advanced techniques that maybe you haven't done yet. So the first one is the CRM reports. So this is really, the financial data, the donor profiles, the supporter activity and behavior. And this is where you're starting to look at those audience segments. So if you haven't already, you can start creating segments based on their past interactions and behavior. So this is really, I'm sure, part of your everyday data that you're collecting. But the way that it can be used in your branding is really to look at those audience segments and to kind of see like, are those correlating with the audience that we've determined in the who of our branding? And then next we have the digital marketing analytics. So this is your email reports, your social media analytics, your website, your Google Analytics, your blog reports, as well as social listening. So some of you may be doing social listening through an app, or maybe you have somebody that participates in groups or just kind of takes note of what people are saying about your organization on social media. So these are those reports that, again, your organization probably does have them handy, but it's a good idea to try to keep them maybe in one place and to refer to them regularly, and then to also make brand related goals referring to these analytics. So we'll get to that a little bit further down in the webinar. So next, this one I'm calling Ask a Question. And this is something that has proven really effective for some organizations. I've attended several conferences over the course of this year, and a lot of the marketers were talking about how this has proven to be super effective for them, where they literally ask one question in an email. So rather than the email really being driven by calls to action and different things that your organization is doing, they're asking one question. And these organizations that have mentioned it have gotten really great results. And it really makes it so specific that you can get the data and the information that you need. So that's something that I would encourage you to try. If there's a specific data point you're looking for in your audience, send that email with that question, really focused on that. You do need to make sure you have somebody that can field the emails, and reply. You don't want to just have all these replies and then leave them hanging. So you do want to make sure you have the capacity to answer the questions, or to answer the emails, but it's a good tactic to really focus in on a specific topic. And then the second part of this is creating social polls. So these get a lot of engagement in social media. You can set them up in pretty much all the channels. LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram offer polls. And it's a great way to, again, have a specific question and get those answers. And it's been proven that people love to share their opinion on social media. So that's why these polls are really great, or asking questions works really well. And with the poll, it gives them an easy way to respond. So I know in the past, marketers have said, oh, just put a question in your social media post. Yeah, that's great, but it still makes people work a little too hard. So creating a poll where they can just click is so easy. And you all know that. You just took a poll in the beginning of the session. So the next one is surveys and interviews. And a lot of you probably are doing your surveys yearly, or maybe more often. But I'd like you to start to think about maybe composing questions relating to some of those brand measurement categories that we talked about. So asking people, how do you talk about us, to your friends? Who do you think we are? What do we do? And using the same questions each year is helpful to kind of keep that benchmark. And then, as I mentioned, Marty Neumeier does have a brand commitment scale survey in his book. I'm happy to, if anyone's interested, I'm happy to share it with you all. I can maybe kind of tweak it a little bit to make it a little more nonprofit friendly, if that's of interest to you as well, using that brand commitment ladder as a survey. And then next is the real world observations and the social listening. And this one I love. This is where you start to listen to those conversations in Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups, online forums, the questions that your audience asks you, whether it's an email they send you or it's in Facebook Messenger. And this is where it's good to create a place to keep all this. So I like to track things like this in Evernote. You can have a Google Doc or somewhere where your whole team can access it, and really start to take notes about the audience behavior and what are they asking questions about? What are they concerned about? What are they excited about, when it comes to our organization? And keeping track of those questions is key. And then next we have secondary research. So these are, reports, case studies, trends, This is looking into what other organizations are doing. And again, this is pretty easy to find and it doesn't cost you anything. It's really just more of the time. And this is something that, I keep up with a lot of the reports in the nonprofit industry, the Giving USA report, the Giving Tuesday reports every year. There's a few other nonprofit reports that are really, really helpful. Again, I'm happy to share those. I just realized I don't have those in the resources, but I'm happy to share those with the audience as well, because I think those are great for just that kind of overall picture on how people are giving and how the giving changes each year. And I think it's really, really useful to keep track of these. And I do keep track of them because, as I said, I love data. And then next we have primary research. So this is where you might work with a vendor and have them actually do interviews with your supporters individually and do focus groups and do user testing. Maybe you're doing UX testing on your website. If you have a program or you do some type of work that really relies a lot on your digital presence, on your website, on an app, then you really might need to hire someone to do some of that testing to make sure that your website is functioning properly, or the app is functioning, or the way that you're interacting with in your programs, people are finding it to be user-friendly. And a lot of times that's tough to do in-house, and that really does require working with someone. And then lastly, we have SEO. So this is where you're looking at which brand keywords are driving traffic. So are people typing in your name? Are they typing in organization that does this? Are they directly mentioning your organization? Are they mentioning just a part of your name? This is really interesting. So it's kind of good to look at, if you have Google Analytics installed, to look at those keywords that are bringing traffic to your website. And also to look at the direct traffic to your website, because that means that people are remembering you and they're typing in your URL or they're typing in your exact name and then getting to your website. So that's really useful to see as a data point. And then also you can set up Google Alerts. So you can see when people are mentioning your organization. Maybe they talk about you in a blog post, in a press release, in an article, and you definitely want to know that when that happens. Oops, sorry, I had one more for you. So the last one is A/B testing. So this is something that is pretty common for email marketing, and you may already be doing this. You may, if you have a pretty decent sized list, you may be sending 2 different subject lines and seeing which one performs better. You may be sending them at different times to see which one performs better, different days. But you can also do this A/B testing in your social channels as well. So you can change up your messaging. You can do different messaging. For a Facebook ad, you can do different messaging, or you can do different messaging on Facebook versus LinkedIn and kind of see what's working and what's working for specific channels. And that's really, really great data to have, to know, are they responding to a post with an image? Are they responding to a poll? So these are really great things to experiment with. And again, I put it at the end because it does really start to take up time. But if you have someone in your organization, if you have an intern that's working with you, or maybe a new hire, to kind of help them get to know your organization, these types of tasks and this kind of work can be great. Okay, so now we'll talk about using the data to improve your branding. So this is where we really want to put it to work. So first, you want to start reviewing your reports and your brand assessments. So if you decide to do like the BQ test, that brand commitment scale, if you do just a brand audit is great. And I've got some templates for that as well that I can share. And then all of those reports that you have, your CRM, your analytics, your surveys, you can print everything out. That's really useful. For brand audits, I have people print everything out, even if it's your website, print out the homepage, print out your emails, because I find it's easier to look at everything visually. So this is where you start to look at everything visually and start to see where you're at and where you might need to start creating some branding goals, which leads us to number 2, setting those branding goals. So you want to start with your organization's overall goals and then see how you can incorporate that into your brand goals. So I generally recommend looking at 4 types of brand goals: awareness, action, loyalty, and advocacy. So with awareness, it's the engagement, the interaction with your audience. Action is the donations, the volunteers. Loyalty is those repeat donations, the people that are always signing up to volunteer. And then advocacy are, that the mentions, the word of mouth. So those are the 4 that you can look at as far as setting the branding goals. And then next, you want to create the KPIs, the key performance indicators, that will help you track those goals. So for example, for awareness, social media engagement, that's kind of, a simple one that most people track. For action, the donations you're looking at, is it going up? Is it going down? Loyalty, how many of those repeat donors do you have? Do you have to reach out to them more often, or do they just give each year? And then advocacy, maybe looking at the mentions. So this is where you're really creating, you're really starting to track the real actual data. So you're looking at, okay, let's set the benchmark for engagement, and then let's set a goal for a 10% increase, or that type of thing. And then lastly, you want to start using that data to actually improve your branding. So maybe you're looking at like, okay, boy, our engagement's really low. Well, let's look at our, what posts are resonating. Okay, we see that post with a video really did well. Okay, let's make a goal to create more video posts. So this is where you start to look at the goals that you've created, reviewed against the data, and then you start to make those adjustments. So that's adjustments in tactics or in channels. Maybe you're saying, you know what, Facebook is just not working out for us, but we're finding that LinkedIn is creating a lot of a buzz. And then maybe you also need to start making adjustments to the visuals or the messaging. So you might be saying, boy, everything's really inconsistent. We're not using the same logo. We're not using the same color palette. So this is where you also start to look at the visuals and the messaging and how that can be adjusted based on the data that you're reviewing. And you can see the stat here from Forrester in a report that they did. Marketers who link their metrics to results are 3 times more likely to hit revenue goals than those who don't. So you really do want to look at create the goals and then have the metrics and see the results, right? And if you're not getting the results that you are looking for, then you can start to think about, okay, how do we need to make some adjustments? And lastly, I have a quote from Edward R. Tufte, who is, he's an author. He's got a lot of great information design books, and he is sort of a pioneer in the data visualization area. And he says, above all else, show the data. And I love this because it really implies visually, he does do a lot of data visualization. He shows the data visually, but it is also really, don't keep all the data, behind wraps that nobody can see it. You really want to start to create a way that you can collect the data and then use it. So whether it's creating a system where everybody can access it more easily, or creating visualizations, that's something that, like I said, Edward Tufte really was a pioneer in that area of creating those visualizations. But you can use, and now the name is escaping me, but there's a great software for doing data visualizations. You can partner with organizations that specifically do that. You can, create your own charts. I find that it's really easier for people to grasp that data and use it when you can kind of see it visually. So it's, whenever you can, run those reports, print them out, look at them, and then compare them to your goals and make the adjustments.